Now, we're learning more about the controversial organization known as ACORN and its relationship with Senator Barack Obama. ACORN, otherwise known as the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, has a history of what our next guest calls rough tactics. He also claims it's been involved in some voter fraud and may be to blame in part for the current financial mess. Ken Blackwell is chairman for the Coalition for Conservative Majority, and he is the former Ohio Secretary of State. And indeed wrote a piece for the National Review Online called An Acorn Falls from Tree. Thanks very much for being with us, Mr. Blackwell.
Greg, it's very good to be with you.
Is ACORN one of the groups that, in your judgment, pushed banks into making many of the risky, unwise loans that caused this financial crisis?
Within a culture, Greg, where we have moved from a nation of savers to a nation very accustomed to living in debt, any group that pushes folks who are unprepared to handle home loans into that situation under the notion that every American is guaranteed home ownership is part of the problem.
Well, what did they do exactly?
ACORN has been part of that problem.
What did they do exactly, and did they use sort of guerrilla militant tactics?
Well, ACORN is a structure within the left's, political grassroots organization. They operate in two areas, in housing and in voter registration. They have been discredited in the area of grassroots voter organization and registration, in that many of their employees have been convicted of felonies and crimes against democracy, and many of them have been indicted. So that's one area. In the area of housing, they were folks who I think went to the extremes in the Community Reinvestment Act and pushing systems and banks to make loans to folks who were not ready and not bankable at the present moment.
Apparently they threatened and intimidated banks into making the kinds of risky loans that caused the financial crisis. But in addition to that, I want to go back to the crimes that you just alleged. Here's what you wrote. I'll quote you. They, meaning ACORN, are hardcore supporters for the Democratic Party. They employ bare-knuckle tactics. ACORN is plagued by repeated investigations of voter fraud and other crimes. Are you talking, are you talking about trying to fix elections?
Well, what I'm talking about is voter fraud. In many instances, they were convicted of making fraudulent registrations, creating voters where voters do not exist. And Greg, at the heart of our democracy is the integrity of the vote. It is the one place where we are guaranteed an even playing field, one person, one vote. And when you defraud the system, you cheat all American voters.
Did Barack Obama help train and organize ACORN?
Oh, absolutely. He was an ACORN trainer and organizer himself. They come right out of the Saul Alinsky school who Saul Alinsky was a radical community organizer who threw everything up against the wall. It was by any means necessary, and Barack Obama comes right out of that school.
Do you believe that there is a direct attempt going on by ACORN and others to steal Ohio, the state of Ohio, in this presidential election, and can that be done?
Well, let me tell you, we have a pretty good system of bipartisan election management, in that we have county boards of elections that are made up of an equal number of Republican and Democrats. I don't think with our transparency that it can be done in the open of daylight.
Is ACORN trying to do it?
Well, let me tell you, here's the problem. They have a history of voter fraud in the state of Ohio, where they made up voters that didn't exist. And so, yes, there have been convictions of ACORN workers across this country, and I think that's the great threat to democracy.
Are they trying to steal Ohio for Barack Obama, who organized them?
Well, let me put it to you this way. The result of many of their activities will be to defraud the election and do away with any concept of one person, one vote, and that is problematic and deserves a spotlight shined on it. And that's why I think in today's Washington Times, there was an article, a column written by former Senators Rudd and Danforth, which basically said that both sides in this race should have a commitment to vigilance and people on the ground to make sure that nobody steals the election.
Well, and I know you're watching carefully there in Ohio. Former Secretary of State Ken Blackwell, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Greg.
Well, the liberal activist group ACORN organizes voting drives across this country. But some say its election activities are not above board. The Consumer Rights League slams ACORN for voter registration fraud and other election abuses. So why would Democrats include money for this group in the bailout bill? Joining us now is James Terry, Chief Public Advocate for the Consumer Rights League. Hi, James.
Hi, Megan. Good to be with you.
All right, it's good to have you. Well, believe it or not, this is still in the bill. That's the latest that we've gotten from our sources on Capitol Hill, which include the lawmakers themselves. The Democrats have included a provision that says not less than 20% of any profit realized from these investments, part of that would go to this group, ACORN. And the House Republicans tell us they are fighting to get this thing removed. It hasn't been yet. James, why is it a problem?
Well, I think it's a problem because when you look at ACORN's structure, they're a massive organization. There are 150 subsidiary organizations with already this year a $110 million budget, and their voter registration activities have spawned investigations in over almost a dozen states. And we're talking about millions of registrations, thousands and tens of thousands of fraudulent registrations, and which is not to even mention that the fact that of that $110 million, a significant portion of this operation is being funded by the taxpayers already. And to put this organization, to earmark money for this organization ahead of the taxpayers is just outrageous.
Why is it described as a liberal activist group? Is it connected officially to the Democrats?
Well, I don't think, they live in a very nuanced world, but I don't think in any official on-paper connection, but I think, you're judged by your actions, and you look at the history of this organization, their relationship with the Democrat Party, their relationship with a lot of the Democrat causes and members of Congress, and I think even if you look at their voter registration drives, I think if you did an analysis of the registrations that they collect, you would see they're overwhelmingly Democrat registrations.
Let me ask you this. They were originally created, I guess, to help lower-income folks get mortgages for zero down and so on. Is that correct? Is that primarily what they do in addition to getting voter registration done?
That is part of it. ACORN Housing Corporation takes a dramatic amount of money from the federal government to help people, ostensibly help poor people get into houses. But one of the things we've seen out of the ACORN Housing Corporation is the very same loan products that they attack and call, what they call predatory, are the very same loan products that they have gone into partnerships with various banks, and we're actually pushing these products on the lower income Americans.
So these bad mortgages
the
are what
down.
caused this problem that we're dealing with on Capitol Hill, and now as part of the bailout bill, to solve that problem, lawmakers are considering giving money back to the group that got those problematic mortgages to begin with. Do I have it right?
Absolutely, and I think that these are the kind of things that only can happen in Washington, D.C., because not only you talk about the modern day practice of this organization, but the roots of this go all the way back to the Community Reinvestment Act and redlining, and when banks were forced to ignore risk ratios and give loans that they would never have considered. And to be sure that once the banks figured out how they could make a ton of money on this, everybody went wild with it. But you can see clearly that even throughout all of this, you have where institutions were incentivized to continue to offer more and more and more of these risky loans because they were getting credit from the government throughout all these various regulatory schemes that were in place.
And James, in ACORN's defense, we haven't spoken with them. We haven't gotten a statement from them. We've attempted, but we failed this morning. So we don't have that half of the story. But I assume they deny these charges that you're leveling.
Well, I mean, what they do very often, they will, it's a big shell game. Like I say, they have 150 different subsidiary organizations, and they juggle blame just like they juggle financing. They juggle blame between organizations, and and particularly on voter fraud, what they'll very often do is they will lay it off to low-level rogue employees. But the fact of the matter is this is not the first time they've done this. This has been 10 years, 5 election cycles. And that's not a accident, that's a pattern.
Got to go, James. Thanks so much for your insights on it. And viewers, we're going to have much more on ACORN.
As we all know, Barack Obama is very proud of his background as a community organizer in Chicago. Tonight, Hannity's America takes a deeper look at an organization that he had and has very close ties to, a highly controversial group called ACORN.
Democratic presidential nominee Barack Obama says his experience as a Chicago community organizer shaped his political views and helped prepare him for the highest office in the land. But as much as he wants to inflate the importance of his neighborhood experience, he barely mentioned one of the groups that he worked most closely with during that time, the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, otherwise known as ACORN. ACORN is a grassroots organization considered by some to be the largest radical group in America. Under the guise of helping low-income families and neighborhoods, ACORN uses shady tactics and intimidation to get what they want. Right now, this ultra-liberal political machine is under investigation on charges of voter fraud.
ACORN employees have been implicated in vote fraud investigations in several states. In Wisconsin, 37 of their employees have been investigated. One, I believe, was indicted this week. In Texas, 2 out of every 5 of their voter registrations in Houston are suspect, may not be valid. In North Carolina, they registered a 14-year-old boy. In Pennsylvania, a former ACORN employee has been indicted for perjury and identity theft.
And that's just the beginning. This shady organization has been involved in voter fraud schemes all over the country for years.
Last year, the prosecutors in Seattle, Washington said that ACORN was at the center of the biggest voter registration fraud in the state's history. People had gone to the county library, they had taken phone books, and they had filled out voter registration cards. Of 1,800 cards they submitted, only six were valid.
But ACORN's dirty dealings go beyond just voter fraud. Back in the 1990s, they used strong-arm tactics to force banks to give high-risk loans to low-income borrowers with bad credit.
ACORN uses militant tactics. They call it direct action. Sometimes ACORN will actually send people to a bank official's home. They'll scare him, they'll scare his kids. Again, all in an effort to get the banks to make these bad loans.
Obama's connections to this radical group began years ago when he first became a community organizer and caught the eye of ACORN head Madeline Talbot, who asked him to train her personal staff.
So all the up-and-coming leaders that Madeline Talbot was using as soldiers in her campaign against these banks, they were trained by Barack Obama. And on top of that, Barack Obama was channeling money toward Madeline Talbot and toward ACORN through his position at the Woods Fund and also in his position as chair of the board of directors at the Chicago Annenberg Challenge.
And Obama's support of ACORN went even further. In some of their early election law cases, ACORN's attorney was, well, you guessed it, Barack Obama.
He was their lawyer in a famous case in Illinois which upheld the constitutionality of the federal motor voter law, which prevented states from pruning their voter registration rolls to get rid of dead people, people who were not eligible, people who'd moved out of state.
If he truly thinks that ACORN is a reputable organization, why has Barack Obama glossed over the work that he did for them? Is he trying to distance himself from the radical group's methods of persuasion? Well, Obama may not have physically participated in their obvious scare tactics, but that doesn't mean that he wasn't involved.
Barack Obama helped to plan an operation where protesters would come and break into a meeting and surprise some businessmen who were sitting around a table and sort of surround them and just stand there silently. Then they all filed out. Well, they didn't do anything physical, but clearly they were intimidating this board of directors.
And what did Barack Obama get out of this cozy relationship with ACORN?
A lot of the ACORN organizers that he had helped to train ended up working for Obama in his first campaign and in his early campaigns as precinct organizers going to get out the vote. Now that technically it would be illegal for Barack Obama to channel nonpartisan foundation money to ACORN and then have ACORN act as an election arm of Barack Obama's campaign.
The Illinois senator's connections to this radical group are still going strong. The Obama campaign recently paid more than $800,000 to the Citizen Services, Inc. Now, that's a subsidiary of ACORN, for, quote, get out the vote projects. Now, up until then, ACORN has managed to fly below the radar, but their dangerous practices are coming back to haunt them and the rest of the country. The economic crisis facing the nation is due in large part to this disastrous decision by financial institutions Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy up risky loans from small banks. But it's groups like ACORN that force those banks to give out those loans in the first place.
Up to now, we've been looking at this whole process from the top down. We've been seeing the Wall Street connection, the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac connection. But if you look from the ground up, that's where ACORN has been the driving force. And Barack Obama has been with them every step of the way.
It seems if the Illinois senator wants voters to believe that he has the answer to the nation's economic crisis, then he needs to distance himself from the group that he once represented.
I think understanding where Barack Obama is coming from would make any voter think twice about whether he's the right person to solve this problem.
Barack Obama says he wants to transcend partisan politics. Barack Obama says that he wants to reach out and work with people on the other side of the aisle. Barack Obama says he would be a moderate president. But his alliance with ACORN belies all of those statements. His alliance with ACORN indicates that some of his closest allies are radicals who want to dramatically change the American economy and push for higher taxes and bigger government.
ACORN, heirs Jeremiah Wright, Obama's list of friends reads like a history of radicalism.